So over 200 episodes in, and it's been a minute since I've done a solo episode, but I wanted to jump through a few lessons learned from speaking with people that I've admired for years and even starting my podcast in my car over 2 years ago. So the first lesson I want to jump into is a lesson that I learned from Jennifer Cohen, and it really solidified the fact that what I did in myself and starting my coaching business and starting this podcast was that I created luck for myself by putting myself in a position to succeed, even though I knew that I wasn't ready for it. And the lesson here is that brilliance is below boldness. And what I mean by that is that for many of us, we feel that we need to have all of the information mapped out for us to take the first step and to actually start moving towards a life that we want to create for ourselves. And the challenge with that is many of us have self-doubt. We don't think we can even create the life that we want to create for ourselves. And what you have to understand is that there is blind luck and there is luck that you create for yourself. And many of us only see the blind luck. We don't see the luck that we can create for ourselves by putting ourselves in rooms and positions to succeed. With this podcast, I started it over 2 years ago in my car, and over 100 episodes of just solo episodes, not one interview. And it was really tough going through that day after day, week after week, showing up each week when it didn't feel like there was much momentum there. It didn't feel like I was going to actually be able to start speaking with people through this podcast and be in rooms with people that, the books behind me prove that, I've spoken with the people that I've looked up to for so long. And so what I want you to take away from this lesson in itself is that rather than looking at what knowledge you need to acquire, I want you to think, what can I do to put myself in a position to succeed? What can I do to put myself in a position to create opportunities instead of waiting for those opportunities? Because the boldness that you have to reach out to the person that you want to get on your podcast, or the boldness that you have to invest into yourself, to, step into something that you've never done before. Like when I started my coaching business, I was not ready to be a coach. I had no idea what a coach even was, but I knew I wanted to help people. And I was 17 years old at the time. I was the youngest coach in over 1,000 coaches. I had all of the imposter syndrome in the world. But you know what that did for me is when I invested and I spent thousands of dollars that I didn't have, put my back against the wall. I was bold enough to put myself in a position to succeed and create luck for myself that set me down a path that I truly did not believe was possible. And I didn't have the brilliance. I didn't have all of the information. I didn't have all of the steps mapped out to create the life that I now live today. But what I had is the boldness to put myself in a position to see what can happen. And the challenge with this is that many people think that they need all the steps mapped out, when really what you need is to create luck for yourself by taking on more than you can handle. Because you will never figure out how far you can go until you push past your limits, because you can't figure out what those limits are. And so putting yourself in a position to succeed looks like being bold enough to take on more than you can handle. And that even looks like, so many people have reached out to me, how have I gotten the guests on my podcast? And the common thread that I always go back to is, are you even reaching out? Are you even asking those kind of people? Because most people aren't doing the work. And so if you're bold enough to ask for what you want, if you're bold enough to put yourself in a position to create what you want, I bet you that you will be surprised of what you can create. But if you never really step out of what you know, you will never create what you really want to create for yourself. You have to let go of what you have to make room for what can be. And that's the mindset that I want you to take from this. And this is from the podcast I did with Jennifer Cohen that you can definitely go listen to, or really the common thread of most podcasts that I've done is that they've created luck for themselves instead of waiting for the luck to come to them. Number 2 is, how can you win even if you lose? With this podcast, like I said, over 100 episodes of solo episodes. And there didn't feel like there was much momentum when I first started this podcast. But what I didn't even recognize at the time was that I was learning how to communicate a lot better through that podcast. I learned how to stay consistent in something for a long enough time to actually start doing the interviews and leaning into the things that I wanted to lean into. But with this podcast, even if there was no growth whatsoever and nothing came of this podcast, this didn't become one of the biggest podcasts in the world that I know that it will become, it still would have been something that set me up for success and helped me become a better person. And so whether it's speaking with the people that I want to speak to, or building a brand, or learning how to communicate better, I am winning in so many different aspects of this podcast, even if I were to lose, quote unquote lose. And so for you, what's something that you can lean into that even if you were to lose in it, you would still succeed? And maybe that's getting yourself in a position to be surrounded by the people that you want to be surrounded by, whether that's someone you want to work for free or whatever that looks like. But you're going to learn a lot more about yourself by putting yourself in a position to succeed. And even if you were to lose at that thing, you would still gain something from it. So what is that thing for you? That's been this for the podcast. I have grown so much from this podcast, both internally, both externally, both in my business, both in my personal life. And it's so important to think of that in your life because there are so many ways that you can succeed in something, even if you were to quote unquote lose from external measures or whatever you define as success. Number three is that most people don't need advice. Most people simply need a space for you to be open and vulnerable and allow them to just feel the feelings that they're feeling, express the thoughts that they're thinking, and be open enough to share the struggles that they're going through. And this came from a podcast I did with Michael Bungay, who wrote the book, The Coaching Habit, the best coaching book of over the last decade. And I read that book over 3 years ago now. And not only did I learn this from the conversation with him, but from coaching with people, is that many people think coaches need the answers. But what I've recognized over and over again is that we don't have the answers, but we definitely have the questions. And through this podcast, through coaching with people, I've gotten really good at asking better questions to bring more out of people. So whether you just want to build better relationships with people, I want you to understand that most people don't need your advice. But what really people need is an open space to be vulnerable and really be themselves because many people don't have that. And if you want to get ahead in your life, whether that's personally or professionally, relationships are the core of that. And you need people surrounded by you to help you go a lot further than you could go by yourself. And that's going to rely on you being a really good person to be open with and to be vulnerable around. And that's something that I've gotten really, really good at over this time that I've worked with clients and even just through the podcast of asking questions to people that maybe they didn't even know the answer to. You know, the last question I ask every guest is, what belief are you currently unlearning? And I don't think there's been one guest that I've asked that question to that they didn't have to think and or sit and think about that. And that's really powerful because that means I'm bringing something out of them that maybe they didn't even know they had inside of them. Maybe they didn't even know the answer. And that means that they have to dig a little deeper. And many people are just relying on the surface area challenges and problems that they're dealing with, but a lot of it's deeper than that. And asking the right questions and really giving people a space to be open and vulnerable will allow people to feel more open to you and feel like you can build a better relationship with. And that's going to allow your business and your personal life to flourish more than you could possibly imagine. The fourth lesson is to reduce the friction in any kind of system or any kind of habit that you want to build. And this is really impactful because releasing over 200 episodes is not easy to say the least. And I've released almost 2 episodes every single week for a couple of years now. And it hasn't been easy. But the one thing that's helped me immeasurably is creating a system and reducing the friction to as much as I can, whether that's the post-production of after I jump off an interview or getting the script ready for when I'm about to record a solo episode. It is so important to reduce the friction when you're trying to build any habit or any kind of system or build anything in your life. You have to reduce the friction because for many of us, we want to increase the motivation, but what it really comes from is reducing the friction. So rather than trying to hype yourself up and think, I need the motivation to get started towards this thing, how can you make it so easy and simple to just show up for that thing? And that's what I've done with this podcast is I've reduced the friction of over time, making it easier and easier to do the post-production, to focus on the thumbnail, to do the things that I need to do and make it easier on me so that I can show up even more consistently. Because the times when it feels invisible, where the progress feels like it is not there, that's when you have to show up. And that's going to be most of the time. And if you're not able to reduce the friction enough to show up throughout the times where it feels invisible, well, you're never going to get the result that you want to. And so in anything that you want to build in life, it's going to require you to show up enough times to actually achieve said goal. And for many people, you're not able to show up enough times to get to the point where the results actually start becoming visible. And so that's going to require you to make it easier on yourself because the easiest way to create a sustainable lifestyle or growth is to make it simpler. And so that's one thing that I've really learned from this podcast that have been impactful, not only just with this podcast, but in my everyday life. The habits that I have, the people that I want to reach out to, the clients that I have, everything comes down to making it simpler for you so that it becomes more sustainable for you as well. This podcast is kindly brought to you by Magic Mind. Now, if you're anything like me, you love coffee, but you hate the jitters that it gives you in that 2 p.m. slump in the afternoon when you still have a lot of day left, but you're not able to be focused throughout that time. And this is why I love Magic Mind. I've been taking it with my morning coffee. It's a small productivity shot that I absolutely love. It's with matcha, which takes longer to release in your body. So instead of feeling slumped at 2 p.m., you actually have that intentional focus and it reduces stress. So I take it with my morning coffee. It helps me drink less coffee, but actually feel focused and not wired throughout the day, which is so impactful because if you're a podcaster or you're taking calls or you're just in general, you need to be focused and have that mental energy. It's been something that's really helpful for me. I've been using it for a few weeks and I guarantee that you will like it. So if you're anything like me and you want to feel focused but not wired, you can go to magicmind.com/youcantoo for 56% off. Yes, 56% off your first subscription. And for your first one-time payment, you can get 20% off, which is insane to say the least, because they have a 100% money back guarantee with no questions asked. Instead of waiting 3 to 5 days for that money back, they'll refund you in 3 to 4 hours because they believe in it. And I believe in it so much. So that's magicmind.com/youcan2 for up to 56% off your first subscription. And if you already use Magic Mind, you can get a discount off your next subscription payment as well. So it's magicmind.com/youcan2. Try it for a few weeks, see if you like it. I bet you that you will, and you will feel a lot more intentional with your day instead of just so wired and really just exhausted by the end of the day. Back to the episode. Another lesson is that the process in itself is the win. For many of us, we think, and I think of this in everything in life. Think about starting a podcast, right? When you think of starting a podcast, you think every single week I'm going to speak to a person or I'm going to release an episode, right? And so the process in itself of showing up every single week is the win. The win is not getting the guests that I want. The win is not ending the podcast, because that wouldn't make any sense, right? I do this podcast because I want to speak with people that I'm inspired by. I want to spread the message that I feel like I need to spread into the world. And so if the quote unquote win was to get to the end, well, that doesn't seem exciting for me. The win is showing up each and every single week. I won at this podcast when I showed up every single week for multiple years on end. And so for you, what's something that you can just be so consistent in that you don't even think about the end result, but you're playing infinite games? And this is something that is really important in life, because we're all trying to get to the mountaintop of whatever mountain we're climbing. But once we get there, we'll recognize that there's another mountain right behind it. And if you're always waiting for the top of the mountain, well, you're going to miss out on what life is. Life is what happens while you're planning for the future. Life is what happens while you're looking for the future. And with this podcast, the one thing that has been the common thread that has really allowed me to show up enough times to make this a top 1% podcast in the world is getting really excited about showing up for the small, minute things that feel like they're not making a big impact every single week, whether that's a podcast or a solo episode that I'm doing, just showing up enough times to actually achieve the result that I'm looking for. But I'm not attached to the end result. I'm attached to showing up each and every single week and doing what I said I would do and keeping the standards for myself. The whole purpose of life is to enjoy the passage of time. So figuring out a way to enjoy each and every single day and optimize for enjoyment, not just for growth, will allow you to show up enough times to actually enjoy the whole process and achieve goals at the same time, instead of just relying on your happiness or your self-worth on achieving the goal in itself. Another lesson that I learned is to choose values over beliefs. This came from a podcast that I did with Dr. John Deloney, which was so powerful, because I want you to put this into perspective. If you don't change your beliefs, you are bound to create a stagnant life. But if you value health, that should stick, right? If you think of any politician in the world, if you knew a politician had the ability to actually change their mind instead of being so dead set on this current way of thinking, I don't know about you, but I'd probably vote for that person, because that shows that they're able to actually put themselves in a position to expand and actually change their beliefs around what they thought was the reality that it had to be, and open their mind up to what it actually can be. And so you always want your beliefs to change. That's why this whole podcast is a You Can Too podcast. I want to help you change your beliefs about yourself so that you can create a life that you didn't think was possible. And that's going to require you to change your beliefs about what is possible. If you value health, or if you value relationships, that should stick, because your values are something that should be a part of who you are. Your beliefs should be something that is malleable over time. And this is a really powerful thing to think about that really blew me away. And that's a podcast that you should absolutely listen to. Another lesson that I learned was plus minus equals. This was a podcast I did with James Altucher that I absolutely loved, because I think this perspective on life will help you excel so much quicker in your everyday life. Whatever skill you're trying to build, whatever job you're trying to acquire, whatever goal you're trying to achieve, this plus minus equals will be really impactful for you. So plus is, you want to find someone that's ahead of you. You want to find a mentor, a coach, someone that has done what you want to do, or someone that has a little bit of insight, a few steps ahead, that you need their kind of knowledge to help you get ahead. So you want a plus. And then you want an equals. So you want someone that's similar to you, that's on the same path as you, that can help push you further, that will help you think differently about the things that you're currently facing, and help you just push a little further along that journey. Accountability buddy, a coach, whoever that looks like for you. Then you also want someone that's minus, because when you teach someone that doesn't know what you are trying to teach, or doesn't have the skill set that you have, you're going to learn it a hell of a lot better if you're teaching someone else about it. Right? When you learn it, you learn it. But when you teach it, you learn it twice. And that's going to help really ingrain it into you. And that's something I've learned with coaching. over these past few years has been really impactful for me because it's helped me get even more crystal clear in the person I want to become. If I'm teaching it to someone else, well, then I have to show up for myself, because otherwise I feel like a phony. I feel like I'm not really doing what I'm telling someone else to do. And that's really, really impactful, and it will help you excel so much in life. Another lesson I learned is that you have to have delusional optimism. And this is a common thread that I've had with pretty much every single guest I've had in this podcast. And that's why I bring them on the show, is because I want to represent what this podcast is all about. And that's the you can too mindset, the mindset that you see someone else doing what you want to do, well, then you can too. And that has to be an affirmation that you almost tell to yourself, even if you can't picture it, even if you don't have the steps mapped out, even if you don't feel like you can create that next level of life. I want you to see people that were once in a position close to you, or even worse off than you, and that were able to create something more than you could possibly imagine. Because almost everything in this world, really everything that has been created in this world, was once a picture in someone's mind and then came to be in the world. People looked at them like they were crazy, and then they were able to create something that was extraordinary. I always use the analogy of the chair that I'm sitting on right now was once a thought in someone's mind. There was once a time in this world where a chair didn't exist. Someone thought about it, they created it. People looked at them like they were crazy when they first thought about it, and then they created it, and now it's something that is in the world. Everything that you want to create in this world is going to come from first imagining it in your mind. People are going to think of you like you're crazy, and you have to act anyways. Because the people that are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that can do it. And so you have to have the delusional optimism to think this has to be delusional to the point where I am so optimistic that this is going to work out, that you put yourself in a position to succeed, to make it work out. You create your own luck in life. The last lesson that I wanted to, because I wanted to keep this short, is that you have to enjoy the in-between days. This was a perspective that Case Kenny spoke about on my podcast, and I absolutely loved this perspective, because if you think of most things in life, you're really going to have 12, 13, just around that area of massive moments in your life. Graduating high school, graduating college, getting your first job, getting your first home, whatever that looks like. You're going to have just a few moments in your life that are massive moments. And most of your life are the in-between days, the days where the progress feels invisible, the days where it feels like, why am I even doing this? Because what is this really going to lead to? Those days, you have to enjoy those days, because that is what life is, right? The life is what's happening while you're planning for the future. Life is what's happening while you're thinking about tomorrow. Life is what is happening while you're thinking about where you want to be instead of where you actually are. And if you have the ability to ground yourself in where you are, you're going to enjoy life a hell of a lot more. And in that, really create more opportunity for yourself. And it's so important to take this perspective, because if you're always projecting where you'd like to be, rather than actually being where you are, well, you're missing out on what life is. There's nothing that's outside of you that can change the way that you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. And that is the core focus of really what life in itself is if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, then nothing else is going to matter, because you will project how you feel about yourself onto the experience that you have, the environment that you're in, everything else in the world. And so if you're able to enjoy the in-between days, I think that you'll achieve a lot more in life and actually enjoy that process of achieving in itself. So if this podcast was helpful, share it with someone that needs to see it. I appreciate you for tuning in immeasurably, and I'll see you in the next episode.